Hi there, guys. Today I'm going to talk about a beautiful story in grade 11, that is The Oval Portrait by Edgar Allan Poe. I believe you will enjoy listening to me for about 10 minutes. Okay, so let's get going with this matter, right? So here is a beautiful pictorial illustration of the cover page of the story. Okay, so about the author, Edgar Allan Poe is an American writer. He was a poet and he was a literary critic as well, and he is best known for his poetry and short stories even today. Okay, he is generally considered the inventor of the detective fiction, and so he is known for his dark and mysterious stories. Clear, guys. So his stories provide a very lonely setting and very few characters. That's what we call the Gothic story, Gothic trend of writing. So, this is the story of an artist who wants to make a painting of his young wife but becomes so obsessed with his painting that he doesn't realize his wife is dying. Okay, so this is the main idea that we read in this story. So, guys, very simple. Okay, right now, the central idea of the story is the confusing relationship between art and life. So after you read this story, anyone may ask you the question, what is the oval portrait all about? You can simply give this statement, okay, in response. Clear? Now, it is all about the relation between life and art. Clear? So, characters in this story, the first character is the narrator, and he is an injured old man, so he cannot sleep well that night because they make a forcible entrance into a large building that looks like a castle. It is called a chateau. Okay, so and because he's distracted by the paintings, a number of paintings on the wall, and he cannot sleep that night. And there is his servant Pedro. He is okay, he's valet. You can also call him a valet. He brings the narrator, his master, to an abandoned chateau so that the injured man, his master or the narrator, can spend the night inside. Okay, so it is also a frame story, or a, let's say, kind of frame narrative. And within the framed story, I mean, there is a story within a story, and in the inner story there is another character, main character. He is painter, and yeah, of course the painter's wife is another minor character. Okay, so guys, I believe you understand it very well. The painter of the oval portrait, here we're talking about an oval portrait, and so he thinks only about his painting, and he is so obsessed. He is very wild and passionate about painting that he forgets his newly married wife. Okay, so there is a very big problem. So, guys, oval portrait is a frame narrative, and in which we find two stories. One story is all about the narrator and his servant. The other story is about the painting or the oval portrait. Like, portrait is a kind of painting that highlights the face and the shoulder of a person. Okay, so that like painters, all right, story, right? So behind painting or making that portrait is beautifully given in the inner part of this story. So guys, I think you are catching up. Let's go ahead. So the setting of this story, as I already mentioned to you, so it is all about within an abandoned chateau, and there is a dark and a very gloomy environment where the narrator spends his night alone. I mean, alone means with his Pedro, or with his servant. Clear. Chateau is filled with candelabras, so it's a kind of stand for candles and trophies and decorations. They were very rich, okay, and they are antique pieces. So the room that they stay for the night is, yeah, least decorated one among the many rooms in that chateau. Okay, so guys, I think you are catching up. The story takes place at night. Clear. Now, Pedro the valet brings the injured narrator to an abandoned chateau for spending the night because he doesn't want the narrator to sleep outside, because sleeping outside under the open sky is very dangerous. And so, although there is nobody there in that chateau, it is an abandoned chateau. No person, nobody living there, and they make a kind of entrance. All right, they get into that chateau and they decide to pass the night. They make a forcible entry. It means forcible entry, and they set themselves for the night in one of the building's smallest and the least comfortably furnished rooms, right at the top. Okay, it lies at the top of the building, which has rich but decaying decorations. In these paintings, the paintings that are displayed on the wall of the room, the narrator takes deep interest and he is really fascinated, right? So he gets really interested, guys, to know about the paintings. So the narrator spends his time admiring the paintings that decorate the strangely shaped room. Since it is already night, narrator makes Pedro close the door and he tells Pedro to sleep on the floor. And because Pedro is simply a servant, but the narrator is a man of letters, he's an educated person who can interpret the painting and who can take an interest in the paintings. He feels like reading the paintings rather than getting to the bed and having a good night's sleep. Another thing is that he also got leg injury and it's very painful for him and he cannot get to sleep. Since he cannot get to sleep, what can he? How can he pass the night? He simply takes an interest in reading the paintings one by one. Okay, he lights a tall candelabrum that stands by the head of his bed, right? He wishes all this dawn that he might give up himself, if not to sleep, at least meditate on these paintings and pictures. He wants to contemplate, meditate, try to interpret the paintings in different angles, like from them different angles. That's what he feels like doing, guys. I think you are catching on the matter. And but in the meantime, under his pillow, right, he happens to find a volume, that's like a catalog. And in that catalog there is a entire description of all those paintings, right, that are displayed on the wall, right? So rapidly and gloriously the hours pass by, and the narrator picks up the catalog and he begins to read the paintings and their interpretation and the story behind those paintings. Okay, so as you can see here, the beautiful picture of the narrator, right, sitting in the bed and reading the catalog and interpreting the uh, paintings on the wall. So I believe you are catching up, guys. I'm not taking much time. Okay, so have patience and please listen until the last end. Okay, I'm just giving you some important questions and sample answer as well. Okay, so I think, guys, let's get going. And while moving the candle closer to the book, the narrator immediately discovers that there is an unnoticed painting. So far, his eyes have not fallen onto this painting, and it is not none other than the oval portrait. Okay, the oval shape is a kind of shape, and there is a beautiful picture of a young and ravishingly beautiful lady. Okay, so the narrator gets really fascinated, attracted, enticed by that picture. Clear? Now, it is the portrait of a young girl ripening into womanhood from just, let's say, from 18, 19 years. She's about to get to 20, 21 year old. That, like, ladies, like newly married girl, let's say, her portrait is made, right? So, yeah, he cannot remove his eyes from that portrait. Like, he looks at the painting hurriedly, then he closes the eyes. Oh, I should not be looking at this portrait because it is already middle of the night. If I look at this portrait, I cannot sleep the entire night. So at first the narrator closes, removes his eyes from the portrait, but the portrait is so enticing that he can't help, he can't help avoid, help reading that painting. So it means that he has got to, like, he takes such a deep interest in that thing, like he cannot put it off, right? So the portrait is a mere head and shoulder, as I told you earlier, and its background is very beautiful. Like, it is filigreed in the golden color, and it is an exceptional piece of art. Okay, so the frame is oval and richly covered with golden color. The painting is very lifelike, as I already told you, as though somebody's real person's head and shoulder have been taken out and put into that canvas. Okay, so he now replaces the candelabrum in its former position and eagerly reads the book, because in the catalog there is the description or the story behind that oval portrait, and he gets interested in reading that one. Okay, now this is at this point the second story begins. Second story means the inner story, the framed story. What was there and who was the painter and who was the person in that painting, right? Means the lady. Okay, who she was, that story begins, right? Is written in the story, the girl in the painting was a maiden of rarest beauty. She was as lovely and playful as the little fawn, right? The, okay, baby deer, right? She was very playful, she was very beautiful, right? But that her time was very bad. Evil was the hour when she saw the painter, and she fell in love with the painter and she married that man. In a way, it was her bad luck, a very beautiful, exceptionally beautiful girl just falling in love with the painter and getting married to her. So it is very unfortunate for her, right? The painter was so passionate. I means that he was so studious. Actually, he was more interested in painting than giving time to his wife. So what happens to any artist, who is newly married but doesn't pay attention to his wife? Definitely the wife goes wild, she may not like the man, newly married couple, like, so the painter would not pay attention. So that's why his painting, the painter's painting, was a kind of rival for the newly married woman, right? But the man wanted to paint the portrait of his wife to please her, because newly married wife, he wants to make the portrait of her and give her the gift, right? So he spoke of his desire to portray even his young bride. Okay, he wanted to portray or paint the portrait of his own wife to please her, right? And it was a terrible thing for this lady because she wanted to make love in life with her husband. So she was naturally happy and loving of all the things. She hated his art, right? Even though she hated his art, she wanted his time, not his painting, right? She could not say no because she was very obedient. After all, she was a new wife. So she disliked the idea, but being a humble and obedient wife, so she said, okay, if you want to paint my portrait, make my painting. So okay, right? She says like that, and the man starts painting her portrait. He tells her to sit in front of him, and now so he begins to make the sketch, first sketch, and this and that. Like so, I think guys, you are catching up the matter. The painter took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour and from day to day. It took him so many days, in fact, right? He became so obsessed with his work that he paid almost no attention to the deteriorating health of his wife. Okay, I mean, deteriorating health means like his wife, like getting weaker and weaker. She was not eating because her husband, the painter, is not paying attention, right? To her, and she was I mean, I think mentally or psychologically disturbed. All right, she could not complete being a new wife, right? So guys, I think you understand this matter. So that's what happened. Okay, she had seen the painter's great interest and burning pleasure in his task, and worked day and night to depict her who so loved him. Now, so when the portrait came to completion, the painter was about to finish painting. He did not realize that his wife was growing paler and about to die, painting and about to die. The painter did not turn his eyes from his canvas even to regard the expression of his wife. So he took many weeks to depict her, to present her portrait, and she became weak and feeble and she was about to die. After many weeks, he completed the portrait and he turned aside to gift the portrait to his wife. But his wife was dead. She was already gone. Right? Means that, guys, the painting was born and the life was gone. He managed to make the painting of his wife at the cost of his wife's life. So, this is what happened. Right? So, this is the overall story. Okay, the narrator came to know about this oval portraits story by reading the catalog. Clear? So, the central theme, let's talk about the theme of this story, right? The central theme of the story, the oval portrait, is the relationship between life and art. Okay, so guys, it is very difficult for the artist to create an art. Goodness knows, how many days and night they have to spend to create any form of art. Okay, so people say that yeah, art could be cheap, very cheap. No, and it has some time, some creativity of the artist here. The painter manages to make that painting at the cost of his wife's life. Okay, so it's not kind of cheap thing. So we got to give value to life, right, and value to art. Okay, and the thing is that when you are passionate about something, that is really good, but when you are obsessed with something, that is really destructive. Here, if the painter had been only passionate in painting, that wouldn't have caused anything, any loss, right? His wife would have been with him all the time. But what happened, he was obsessed with. So guys, obsession is something dangerous, right? So we should not get even obsessed with any kind of art or passion that we have. Clear? The story also develops this idea. The painter of this story has become successful through his artistic work, but his wife has become the victim of his artistic task, right? She loves her husband extremely, that's why she doesn't reveal her pain or trouble, and he takes the advantage of her submissive nature, and ultimately the wife passes away, but the painting is born. Okay, so guys, you, I think you understand that the painter manages to capture the beauty and youth of his wife forever and ever in that painting. Okay, in the portrait, now in the portrait, that his wife will never get older, right? So, but the life is already gone. The painting is born. Painting, now he gives the immortality to the life of his wife. Clear? So, this is the ability of art. So, how you interpret it, it is up to you. Okay. So, now before we wrap up, guys, so look at this sample answer that I have prepared for you. Where did the narrator and his servant make forcible entrance? Okay, guys, I've already told you that we go to write the short answers in 75 words, two paragraphs, right? First paragraph introduction, second paragraph main answer. So the story, The Oval Portrait, was written by an American writer, Edgar Allan Poe. It is a gothic story that explores the relation between life and art. Clear? This is introduction. Now look at the main answer. The narrator and his servant were on a long and tiring journey over a mountainous region, right? For some reason, the narrator had a wounded leg. He had got a hurt in his leg. It was getting dark and they felt unsafe to pass the night under the open sky. Since there wasn't any guest house nearby, any hotel or motel nearby, they made a forcible entrance to an abandoned chateau at the top of the mountain. Okay. So guys, if you see here, I think tentatively you can see 75 words, right? Write 70 words or 80 words, no problem, but write in two paragraphs. I believe you guys are doing well, right? Catching up very well. And here are some more questions to answer for you. So try to write the answers by yourself. Okay. I believe I have done my task. So if there is any problem, please write the comments, and guys, don't forget to subscribe my channel. Okay, I believe yeah. So you will be doing pretty well with me. Keep tuning and following me. Okay, bye bye and have wonderful time. But see, the some more questions here. Right, these are the questions. Thank you very much. See you.